Hi folks, Jonathan Wilson, the GuitarViol guy, and just going to answer an FAQ. It's a loaded question, and this FAQ is, if I have a GuitarViol tuned to, say, B, the low B tuning, can I tune it to E? I'm going to have to explain some things. It is a yes and no answer. Yes, you can, but the strings have to be changed. And the reason is the lower tuned strings tuned up to E would put it at such a high tension, either the strings will break or even cause damage to the instrument, caving the top end under an intense pressure. If the proper strings are put on there, that's not a problem. However, I need to point out a few things, that each one of these bridges is actually tempered to that tuning, or intonated is another term we can use. And what that means is that the string length is varied at the stopping point over the bridge. So that means that, and if you can bring that in a little closer, you can see that the top of the bridge has sort of a squiggly line. And here's the other bridge that this was one that was to B, and this one now is tuned to E. So in order for me to get this instrument that was originally tuned to B, we had to change the bridge to make it optimal. Now, will it work if you just take the strings and switch it on the bridge? Yes, it will. However, your intonation might be off a little bit. These are actually the layout sheets that I use, and you can see the difference, maybe up close, in the actual stopping points of the strings on the two tunings. So you can see that there is a little bit of difference on that. Couple things I want to point out. One is I recommend changing strings. When you're doing string changing, please change one string at a time while the rest of them are under full tension. The reason why, there's a few reasons. One is that we want the bridge to remain stationary in the spot that it's adjusted to. If it moves any, then we have to sort of come over and move it back and forth until all the intonation's back on again. So if you loosen all the strings and the bridge, comes off or whatever, all that whole process has to happen again. In such a case, I do recommend taking a Sharpie and marking the exact locations of where they were. That way, but then again, I'm recommending that you don't do that, because there is a sound post on the inside. And if I can get a little view of that for just a moment. There's a sound post in there, and that's right under the treble foot of the bridge. It's actually slightly back from it, which seems to be an optimal point. And if the top is loosened, there's a chance that thing can fall over. And if you ever have a sound post rattling around on the inside of your bridge, please untune it and contact me for further advice. The sound post is both a structural piece in there, and we move it around to adjust its sort of EQ and response. But also, more importantly, it plays literally a pivotal role, and I'm going to explain that literal language in just a second. I'm going to see if I have an actual, here's a sound post right here. So when we have the treble foot of a bridge over that sound post, it is literally taking the side-to-side motion of the strings and moving it up and down like that. Underneath this foot is a bass bar that runs back and forth. And so that bass bar is literally moving, and so carrying the sound across the top. So there is a mechanical property to the sound post. It's not just a thing that's in there to prop up the top. There is an actual function. Just a little quick historical departure from that. There is a bunch of, I guess, old evidence of early instruments that had the sound post in the middle, and somewhere probably around Stradivarius or Amati's time, they had figured out that putting it under the treble foot really yielded a much more powerful result. And so they say that the sound post is the heart and soul of the instrument. So it's very important that you don't slack the strings if you can avoid it, and avoid having the sound post falling over. I do this all the time. I put sound posts and I move them around. This is not something that's standard issue equipment, the sound post setter for a GuitarViol. And if you ever do get in trouble and you're far away from my shop, perhaps over in Europe, Australia, or you're just out in Kansas somewhere and it's impractical to send it to me, a local violin shop can handle such a thing. But it is something that I'd like you to be aware of. So, in summary, the bridges are cut to the various tunings. And when we tune one to B, we use a certain set, a certain sequence of strings. And then there is a different sequence of strings that go to the standard E tuning. Now, some people do ask me, can I tune it to an alternate tuning, say, for instance, Dadgad? Yes, you can. That's not a problem. As long as you're within a step of the intended tuning. I'm going to make one note here also about the E tuning and the high E string on the E tuning. That is, I believe, in D'Addario stock number H515. It is intended to be tuned to E, typically on some 5-string cellos. The only thing about this particular string is because it's so thin, it's also very fragile. If it doesn't break off the top, the windings can come off fairly easily, and I would recommend, ordering a couple of spares and just keeping them in the case. What happens is when the wrappings come off, the intonation goes completely south, and you can use a plain, say a 12 or a 13 guitar string as a substitute, and there is a sort of bridge wrap we do with a surgical tubing that takes the shrillness off and is not a bad substitute for that string. However, you're going to find the H515 sounds the best. And these helichors, by the way, I've been very satisfied with as what we use as stock strings. Anyway, I hope I've answered some of those questions for you and perhaps created a few more, who knows. But anyway, if you want more information on the instruments of build, go to GuitarViols.com, GuitarViols.com, or TogaManGuitars.com. Anyway, this is Jonathan Wilson, Guitar Viols Inc., signing off, and have an exceedingly awesome and inspired day.